Hey, hey, what's up, you all amazing humans out there? Welcome to the Back on Track podcast. I'm brought to you by I Am Somebody. I am your host, Jennifer Bulbrook, and I am here dedicated to offering you a unique experience through inspiration by showing you that you are somebody. We share personal experiences, we discuss serious issues, such things as all mental health, and working through the process of having our thoughts serve us by incorporating new techniques into our daily lives. At I Am Somebody, we own who we are because we are somebody. And this week we have what I would call a very, very special guest, may even call a reality TV celebrity with us. We have Kyle Moore, who you most of you probably know from Big Brother Canada, but he is also I guess he's the host and founder and all that of his own podcast called Life's a Wreck podcast. Welcome, Kyle. I'm so excited to have you on today. It's, this beautiful Sunday morning. How are you doing?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Jennifer. This is really lovely. I'm doing really well, thank you. Things have been in a really good place recently, so very much looking forward to our conversation. And yes, thank you for having me on. This is lovely concept. The I am somebody, very cool. So I'm
Thank you.
definitely looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you. I really wanted to kind of have you on, like I had mentioned earlier, was because, I'm a female. And so you get my perspective and my
Sure.
experiences in that, but we all have different experiences in that. And I think it would be really helpful for the viewers, especially the male viewers out there,
Mhm.
to hear from another male to know, like, this, mental health can affect anybody, and just to hear
Yeah.
your experiences and like the different opportunities and all that kind of jazz that has to do with, your story and so forth.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, it's a really amazing angle to come at it from. I mean, I'm from a small town in Atlantic Canada where men didn't talk about mental health issues or struggling, and if you did, it was that typical, stigmatized thing that you're weak or you lose value as a man. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. So very much looking forward to giving that perspective.
Awesome. Yeah. Like I have actually listened to a couple of your episodes of your podcast. And
Oh,
obviously,
thank
I've
you.
been following you on Instagram for some time now. I'm not a stalker, but I do follow you. But I must say, like, I do love the openness that you have and the
Thank you.
willing to be vulnerable and talk about your experiences and really get down and gritty with even your guests that you have on, and
Mhm.
not shy away. And it helps other people realize that they don't have to shy away for whatever reason to talk about their experiences and what their, thoughts and struggles are with their own life.
Absolutely. Well, that's the thing is like I think that there's such a beauty and vulnerability. I think that there's like, so often we kind of approach life with this, with this disillusion that we're not human, that, there's somehow like, that we put people up on a pedestal and that we can't just be ourselves and be imperfect and cherish that and just appreciate the fact that, some things are going to get tough, some things are nitty gritty, and the human experience itself is flawed and gritty. And, it's really wonderful with the podcast to be able to have people on and say like, hey, like for an hour, let's just pretend that we're not perfect. Let's have conversations. I don't know everything about you. You don't know everything about me. Let's sit down and have a conversation about maybe some shared interests or work that you're doing or work that I'm doing. And yeah, I think that when you give people an opportunity to be accepted for who they are, I think that you really get some really amazing content out of it, but also just some amazing conversations to share, which is just, I'm so passionate about that.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people can really, if you think about it, relate more to that than what they do see
Absolutely.
on social media, which is the perfect part, right? That's
Yeah.
where like everyone's like, well, what the hell? Like, why they have the perfect life and they get this and this. But when it comes down to like really listening to the imperfections and the realism in that, that's more relatable because that's what
Hmm.
everybody is really going through. People
Yeah.
aren't looking at like social media and seeing, oh, like look at her, she made $10,000 this year and has
Yeah.
this, great marriage and all that, but you didn't see how she got there and all the struggles and everything else
Hmm.
along with it.
Yeah, yeah, I was really open that my eyes were open to that world big time after kind of my experience with Big Brother because I did kind of like that was my first kind of foray into the world of influencers, social media, kind of content creators. And it's so amazing because through that show, you do get to know these people as human beings, but in a very, stressful environment. And then, afterwards, you still know these people, but and then you get introduced to the whole world of Big Brother and all the people who have done it before you. And a lot of those people, it's like you see the highlight reel. And that's granted, there's the Big Brother community, the people who have been on it, so many amazing, wonderful people. But that's just the reality of social media. I mean, you give the highlight reel, and that is one of those things that I try my best to kind of just be as authentic as possible. But even
Mhm.
still, even through authentic content creation, I suppose you could say, there is absolutely still a level of, like, I don't always show like the most you know heavy downs that I'm experiencing. Sometimes it's like, oh, this is kind of like a very like aesthetic struggle right now. Like,
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like, I'm having a tough time, but it's not like the wow nitty gritty, like pulling myself up off the ground, rock bottom kind of thing.
Mhm.
So it's a very social media. That's a whole conversation in and of itself. It's definitely the layered conversation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Let's actually start and kind of introduce the viewers to kind of who you, Kyle, are. I know some of you from following you and from your time on the show of Big Brother.
Sure.
So but what like can people know about you and like your own
Mm,
experiences with mental health? I know like
mm,
you've had experienced some struggles with OCD and
yeah.
anxiety, I believe.
Yep.
So can you just maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so my two diagnoses are OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, and general anxiety disorder, GAD. And those two are kind of a nice little one-two punch, a little bit of a tandem who work off each other. And at times in my life have certainly kind of made things much more difficult. But yeah, like I had mentioned, I grew up in a super small town in Atlantic Canada. And growing up, I wasn't taught how to I wasn't taught the language for describing what I was going through. And as a child, like, I was somebody who would have, I wouldn't be able to sleep through the night. I would be terrified of, I wouldn't be able to watch the news when I was a kid because I was just so worried that anything that I saw would directly happen to me and my family. And this is when kind of like the OCD stuff started, where the checking, before I went to bed, I had to check all the doors, the windows, under my bed, the closet. I had to check everything because I was convinced that if I didn't do that, that somebody would break into our house and to, for lack of a better word, literally would kill my family. That was the intrusive thought. And for somebody who's 7, 8 years old and doesn't know how to like explain that, it led to kind of these areas of my life where I just had these disillusioned sense of self, and I didn't know, I kind of thought that, oh well, if I'm having these thoughts, then maybe just I'm inherently bad. And then the anxiety would kick in. It was just kind of this really you know wicked space to find yourself in. And that was something that had moments in high school where things got super overwhelming, crisis moments, and again in university. And it's definitely kind of been one of those things where, as I progressed through my life, I learned that everything would have been a lot easier at a younger age if I had just known how to talk about it, and if I hadn't have felt so ashamed of what I was going through.
Mm.
I really could have avoided a lot of years of pain if I had have just said, like, okay, like, if I had have just been given the tools to help communicate what I was going through. And so that's kind of why I started the podcast, and why I wanted to become an advocate for mental health, was because of the fact that I was like, it's really not rocket science. It's not something that you need to give people a formal 8 year psychological education. You really just need to let them know that they're not alone, and that the things that they're experiencing are normal things, and that there is something that you can do about them. In so many cases, obviously not all cases, but in so many cases, a lot of there's that precautionary care that can be done to help mitigate some of the more extremes later in life.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. And to bring it up, like when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and OCD, a lot of people out there would be like that would prevent them from doing things in their lives.
Of
And it
course, yeah,
obviously doesn't prevent you. Like you went on, like for example, many people would be like there's no way in hell I'm going on a reality show. Like I'm not going on Big Brother Canada. Even people who
yeah,
aren't struggling with anxiety or anything like that, a lot of people
sure,
wouldn't do it for their fears.
yeah.
So a lot of people look up to you, and it's like you're an
Oh,
inspiration.
thank you.
You are an inspiration because they are like going, well, if he can do it, then I can do it, right? But
Mm,
like I guess let me ask you this: what, if
sure.
any, did you have struggles when it came to
Mm-hmm.
like applying for the show and really following through with
Mm,
doing that? Did your anxiety in that ever get in the way, or was it something like you were just confident in doing from the start?
mm. I don't necessarily think that it's such a good question because it's so the experience in and of itself brought with it so many complex emotions, and that the pre leading up to Big Brother, being on the show, and then post Big Brother, those are three very almost different like chapters in this book of the past kind of year. And I think that leading up to it, I was always somebody who, through the podcast and stuff, like, the idea of being vulnerable, that was something that I had almost, I'd become familiar with. I'd become familiar with the idea of sharing my story and seeing the profound positives that came from doing that. I had one of the biggest things was that after sharing my story, I had the opportunity to hear from some, guys I went to high school with who reached out and said, "Hey, I started going to therapy because of your podcast." Or I started like I decided to start talking with my spouse about my mental health challenges that I didn't really even recognize that I had until I started hearing
Mhm.
what you were doing. And so that for me was like, oh my god, like what a beautiful thing to be able to kind of like share with another person. And if I continue to go on this path and reach a broader audience, hopefully I have the opportunity to show people that you are capable of doing these things regardless of your diagnosis or what you have. And I certainly was not the only neurodivergent person in the Big Brother house. And that's not my story to tell, but I know for a fact that there was other people who were in that house who struggled with similar things that I do. And I think that like during the show, that was definitely kind of when I noticed that my mental health played a little bit of a bigger role, kind of like in my experience, because it is such a pressure cooker. It is a stressful, um, and I use this word, and I know that like this might catch a little flack, but it's an inhumane environment. It is. You are in a house with bright lights. It is go go go. You see these cameras everywhere. You have a microphone on. It isn't a conducive environment to just kind of like human leisure and peace per se. And that's
Mhm.
kind of part of the experiment in and of itself. And that's obviously it is a stressful environment. It's kind of what makes good TV. And that was kind of when I really noticed that it was like this you can do so much self-care, but really when you're in the thick of it, it is very tough to slow down the thought processes, to not allow the mental health challenges to kind of creep back in. So that was definitely certainly challenging, but I think that what I showed myself over in the lead up was that I'm capable of doing tough things. I think that that's something that so many people shy away from, is it's like, oh well, it's going to be significantly challenging. It's like, but you're capable of doing challenging things. Throughout my life, it's if I only did things that would be easy and comfortable, I wouldn't have done very much stuff. I wouldn't have started the podcast. I wouldn't have went on Big Brother. I would have just kind of taken the back seat in life and just kind of like experienced it from an aisle seat. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm a big believer that you get one shot at this thing, and I'm not here to let it slip by, I guess. And then post Big Brother, that was definitely where that was where it was the most challenging, because through my experiences on the show, I'm not somebody who believes in regret. That's just not something that it's not something that I think the idea of saying I should have done something, so many people operate to the best of their abilities given their situation, given their life experience, and then to look back on that and say, and to bash yourself and say, I should have done this, I should have done that. There's no productive emotions, there's no productive mindset at play there.
Mhm.
So that was kind of one of those things, but still, to see people it's no secret that I was a bit of a villain on this season in terms of like, stirring the house up and kind of making some big moves early on and turning my back on some alliances and yada yada yada. So the pushback from people within the Big Brother community and the online communities as well that was kind of tough to see, because it's hard when you've
Mhm.
struggled with your self perception for your entire life, and then every time you open up a social media account, there was people sending death threats to me and just loved ones in my
Wow.
life, and really kind of tearing me down, and it was one of those things where that was then initially when you're stressed, your nervous system has been completely shot from this experience, and how go 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 and then stop, and it's just like you kind of just feel like you just hit this brick wall, and you're like, whoa. And then all of a sudden your immune system has, or your nervous system has to catch up.
Mhm.
That was really tough to kind of handle that at the beginning, but in hindsight, what a gift. Because as a 24-year-old young man, I had the opportunity to be there for myself and stand up in front of a lot of people and say, your perception of me has no bearing on my worth as a person. And the people who are around me, the people who are intimately involved in my life are very proud of the things that I've done, and I'm very proud of the things that I've done. And so there's no point in kind of me being ashamed of the path that I'm on, when I think that the path that I'm on is very beautiful, and I think it has a lot of potential to do a lot of good, and I'm very happy about that. So a lot of mindset kind of at play in there.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that, and be proud of who you are. And number one, I
Yeah.
want to say those people like death threats and that, like, come on, guys. Like,
Yeah.
I don't understand like why people have to take it so low, especially like part of what they see of you on TV is only a part of what they see of you on
Yeah.
TV. It's
Yeah.
not who you are as a human, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't take all of the wonderful things you've done in life, right?
100%. Well,
And
and I
it's a
mean, granted,
game.
yeah, well, that's what I was gonna say is like you take 16, everyday people, and you throw them in a house with, as I said, the lights, the cameras, everything,
Mhm.
and then dangle $100,000 in front of their face and say, "Hey, one of you gets this." It's not exactly going to be the most like, and that was one of those things that I kind of joked about and told people before I exited the show. And it was this kind of like quip of saying like, I can't wait until you all realize that only one person wins this game, because it was just something that, especially people on the outside too, it's like, oh well, they didn't act in a
Mhm.
very, they didn't act in a way that I think is appropriate, but like not acting inappropriately, but just
Mhm.
kind of in terms of an emotional response to the individuals around you. And it's like, it's kind of not that. People say it's, oh, it's real life. It is and it isn't. Like there's certainly this like new environment that's created where it's like, yes, you do have to step over people, you do have to kind of like lie and cheat and fight and claw and do the things that you think are best to achieve this one singular goal. And
Mhm.
so I think a lot of people look at that and they say, well, I certainly wouldn't have, done this, that, and the other. And it's kind of tough to say when, and before I took part in the show, I said the exact same stuff. And then I took part in the show, and then I was like, a little bit different than that. So it's when people make a judgment of you based on your, how you competed in a game, it's a little bit kind of one of those things where it's like, uh, they're missing just a little bit of the point.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love when people say, like, I wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
But you never know what you would do until you're in the situation. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes for anything in life.
Yeah.
And, I just wanted to kind of like finish off with the one thing you said about like, the post part of Big Brother and the, I should have done this and I should have done that. And that you said wasn't, it doesn't bring good mindset, right? It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
bring up any good emotion there. And what I always tell like my clients and that I work with is like, I always say like, let's get rid of the should and the shouldn'ts, because to me that's
Yeah.
just a part of way of judging yourself and the like decisions you made or whatever, and that does
Absolutely.
nobody any good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just be proud and realize like you made the decisions, whether it's in the game or in life, and you
Of
made them
course.
for a reason at the time, right?
Yeah.
So that just goes for everybody out there. But I guess what I wanted to ask was, I
Mm-hmm.
know you struggled, maybe not struggled isn't the word, but like obviously mental health takes a play and kind of crept up a little bit. You said while in the
Mm-hmm.
house and that.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you did? Like I know you had talked on your podcast a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
meditation. What was
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff that you did to help you get through when you were having a down moment or that?
Yeah, meditation was huge because that's, and I will say, like, I'm really thankful for some of the people who were in the house with me, because they were actively engaging in their mental well-being as well. So it did kind of make it easier to, see somebody taking care of themselves, and kind of that little mental check. They're like, right, yes, I got to take care of myself. This is a tough
Mhm.
environment to be in. Got to take care of myself. But meditation was the biggest thing, genuinely. I think that meditation, and also just kind of like taking it once in a while, and this was something that I'm very thankful that I did, because I don't think that everybody does it when they're on the show, but like taking a step back and just really looking at what's going on, and not like looking at what's going on in the game, or looking at, what's going on with dynamics, but just being like, what a unique opportunity. What a very like very stressful, but like, and looking at it objectively, and almost joking and laughing with yourself, being like, God, this is hard, but like pretty neat, like, I'm 24, 23. I was 23 at the time of the show, and it's like, I'm 23 years old. And like, that's pretty cool. What a neat little thing to accomplish at this point in my life. And wow, what a weird game. What a weird life experience. I can't wait to tell my kids about this one day. And that was very beneficial for me, because it humanized the experience, where it was like,
Mhm.
wow, this isn't my entire world. This is only a singular little snippet of time that's really tough, but it is still just a little singular snippet of time that, wow, when I leave this place, I'll never get to experience this again. So
Yeah.
many, I mean, who knows, maybe, but like, I don't know. But
Hmm.
it's still, it's like, wow, what a unique opportunity. And then yes, the meditation was lovely. Gino is a big meditator, so Gino and I got to meditate. Marty as well. We would meditate together, and during that time, like, I think that what makes that experience so tough for so many people is that it does stir up so many different emotions that you've experienced through life and maybe repressed. The dynamics of kind of being the odd one out, that's something that every person who gets voted out of that house has, that feeling of the odd one out. And so many times throughout
Hmm.
your life you've experienced that, whether it's through friend groups in high school, or even being on the outside of like family dynamics and that kind of stuff. So it brings up some very tricky emotions to deal with. And so one of the things that we did through meditation was a lot of self work. And this was kind of the meditation that I've always done, is breathing myself into a meditative state. And then the meditation that I love and that I do frequently is imagining a door in front of me. And when I walk through the door, there's a version of myself in this room. And I don't judge. I don't say I'm going to talk to the younger version of myself. I'm going to talk to myself in the future. I'm going to talk. I just open the door, and who's ever there obviously needed to have a voice. And so with me, I would go and I would open the door, and I would sit there, and in my mind I would have a conversation with whatever version of myself showed up, and that really kind of gave me an opportunity to do some very unique healing. And it's one of the reasons why I'll always look back on that time, as stressful as it was, with a lot of like, kindness, is because of the idea that, wow, I got to work through some really tough things in that tough environment that maybe wouldn't have been stirred up to the point of being recognizing them right away and dealing with them if it hadn't been for that environment.
Yeah, and to be able to work through it in that while in that type of
Yeah,
environment, because that environment is stressful for anybody who's just,
absolutely.
isn't going through anything and who's, having a great old day time.
Yeah.
And so like just that alone also is a beneficial and like I mean like something to be really proud of and something to
Oh, thank
look
you.
at. Um for you had mentioned like the one, we all kind of feel like we're the odd one out, and I
Mm,
think that we all, you're right, I think everybody has felt like this at one point in their lives. They have
mhm,
felt like they're the odd one out, they don't feel included. And so I guess what do you have to say, like any tips for them who
mm,
are out there and they're sitting at home and they're feeling like, they've always wanted to go on Big Brother and they've
mm,
always wanted to do, their own podcast, and they just
mhm,
never felt like they were good enough and never felt like they
mm.
belonged. And who are they to do it in that? What would you say to them?
It's so tough because I don't always think this advice that I'd like to give is applicable to every situation. I think it's important to kind of put that caveat in
Yeah.
place. But I think that there's a true power in the idea that life is lonely. It is like you are born alone and you die alone. And
Hmm.
throughout this, the way that you perceive the universe is your perception, and it's singular. And as much as there is a true beauty and connection, and it is wonderful and it is lovely, the relationship that you have with yourself is the only relationship that you will always have. And that's why, like, to talk about this odd one out kind of situation, like when I left the Big Brother house, there was like, as I said, I wasn't necessarily openly accepted by the Big Brother community. There was a lot of people who, like, genuinely like bashed me for like how I played and the way that I kind of went about it. And the online community, which, like, if some people know the backstory of how I got on the show, was how I got on the show was through people finding me online. And this whole Kyle Moore from season 9, and people thought it was me. And then I just became part of this community, and it was beautiful. And I had so many great conversations. And then those same people, as soon as I got on the show and gave it my best, turned around and said some really tough things to kind of deal with. And so I felt very othered by the experience as a whole. But at the same time, the mindset of that's all external. Everything that I'm going through is outside of me. And the only way that I will, be affected by this situation is if I let it creep in, is if I let these people's opinions of me change what I think about myself. And that was one of those things where I was like,
Mhm.
listen, I am a 23-year-old kid, a flawed individual who, has dedicated large portions of his life to trying to give people a voice, to trying to be, a voice for people to talk about mental health openly, who wants to eventually make significant changes in the world of mental health. And I'm very happy with kind of who I am. And I think that, like, and embrace my flaws. Absolutely. I think that, like, life would be pretty boring if I was just some, like, cookie cutter perfect human being. And so I think that that's always the thing that, like, I really do think that cultivating that relationship with yourself is a it is a massive, benefit in life, because as you like, those experiences will happen. You will not get the promotion, you will be othered by people, there will be, times when you find yourself on the outside looking in. But if you are happy with the lens that you're looking through, you cannot be phased. And so I think that, like, obviously it is tough, because that's a framework that is cultivated over years, and through my own situations and my
Mhm.
specific life experiences. But I do think that it's important that when you're looking at these situations, that you do start with yourself and then work outward. um, and just, understand that there's going to be a lot of people who don't understand who you are, don't understand the value that you possess as a human being, and it reflects much more on them than it does on you. And your only goal is to experience this life and this universe and the fleeting time that we have to the best of your abilities, and then, carry
Yeah.
on. There you will find your people. I always believe that if you are happy with yourself, if you are confident in the person that is you, you will find your people.
Yeah, and be true to who you are. And like,
Always.
those people that are bashing you are just a part. They're just a little fraction of
Of
humankind, right?
course. Of
And you can
course.
choose to listen to them and their opinion, or you can go and listen to your own opinion on how you
Hmm.
truly feel, and really know that like there's other people out there that
Hmm.
have the same opinion and have and believe in you, and have the different and feel the complete opposite of those people that are bashing who it,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
so it's up to us who we want to listen to. And like you said, love
Hmm.
yourself first. And then
Always.
the right people will come,
Hmm. I also
right?
think that there's a really interesting conversation to be had here too, about the idea of, like, people pleasing, where it's like, for instance, when you meet a group of people who do other you and who do not see your value, it's very easy to kind of like, you know focus in on just that community and be like, I have to fix this, I
Mhm.
have to be the one to go in there and do the damage control, and I have to limit my interactions in my social kind of, universe, to this one community of people who don't like me. It's okay not to be liked. It's okay for people to say, like, that's not my favorite person, or to say, even bad things about, terrible things about you, because that's the thing, is like, this is one community that I will get to experience in my life, and maybe it wasn't the community for me, and now I get to go forth and look back on that time and say, that experience is what I got to make it. And now as I move forward, I will get to meet wonderful communities of people. And I do not need to be liked by every single person who comes along and meets me throughout my existence here.
Absolutely. And so many times we're always so worried about like, is this person gonna like me? Why does this person not like me? And we
Yeah,
all
who
into
cares?
that. But when we don't even look at like, do we even like the person? Like,
Yeah.
like is that person who's judging us in that? Do we want to be friends with somebody who's judging us, or someone who's bashing
Hmm.
us, or somebody who
Hmm.
would talk to somebody that way? And
Yeah.
nobody looks at that. We just look at, oh my God, like they don't like us. Meanwhile, they're
Yeah.
calling us names and all that. Why would we want to be friends with somebody like that? And if we
Yeah. I
really
don't. Yeah.
ask
100%.
ourselves that question, we'd be like, we don't. And so then it would be less relevant about whether or not they like us or not.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is so funny, because it's like, you will have people who will just bash you. And then it's like, I need to make this person like me. It's like, well, this person, when you see somebody do something flawed, do you go out of your way to bash them? No. So obviously there's a
Right.
difference in kind of how you
Exactly.
both approach life. I would kind of maybe think that maybe that person just kind of has their own stuff that they're going to work with on their own
Mhm.
time. And that's not your problem. So you can just kind of carry on your way and keep taking a step along the journey.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like too, you had talked about being alone, right? And like I guess
Mm,
the question is like, what's even wrong with being alone? So many
nothing.
people are always just so afraid of being alone and don't want to be alone in that. But if they really sit down, and if we really all really sat down and thought about it, like what's really wrong with being alone? And the
Hmm.
majority of humans like to be alone partially
Yeah.
of the time. Like who wants to be around people 24/7?
Well,
Except
I
for in
think that
Big
there's,
Brother.
yeah, granted, in that house, I can promise you that nobody wanted to be around, other people. Everybody wanted to be alone after a few days. But I will say, like, I think that, like, I think that there's almost like this little fear. and this is not, really backed by anything. This is just my own life experience and just kind of what I've seen throughout some people in my life. And I think that there's a bit of a fear to spend time with yourself, because I think that in a world where with social media and stuff, that we are kind of been conditioned to be judgmental, where it's like you are the judge of everybody else in your life, because you look, and with that like button you are saying I like this. And so like just inherently that means that if you don't like something, then there's the judgment that's going on right there. And I think that like in a culture dominated by judgment, it's almost scary to meet yourself, because what if you don't like yourself? And that's something
Mhm.
that I experienced throughout so many years of my life, was I didn't like who I was. And that was a
Yeah.
tough thing, because when I did sit alone, I was like, I don't like the person that I'm sitting with.
Mm.
And I think it was after I started to acknowledge the fact that, it's okay to start from that place and build from there, and understand that, you can go through an entire life and saying I'm not enough. I don't like this person that I am. Or you can start to say like, well, now why? Well, now what am I not giving myself? What am I? Because I am, human beings, we're the universe incarnate. We're love. We're like, we are able to be there and just exist fully. And so it's like,
Mhm.
okay, well, now what am I not giving myself that is leading to me being like this? What emotions are unhealed that is leading to me feeling this way about myself? And so I think that not enough people spend time with themselves because of this fear of, well, what if I don't like myself? Why not just engage with externals my entire life, and then I never have to meet who I actually am as a person?
Mhm.
And I think that like one of the things that I've been so fortunate of is that like, so a theme throughout my life is that I've constantly learned and developed who I am as a person. The podcast, that was, I was a university kid who was going out drinking every weekend, and loathed who he was as a person. And then as I sat with the podcast and I talked, and I literally, this was the first ever iteration of the podcast, was I would sit down and I would record two podcasts, and it would be a conversation with myself and the voice. And this happened naturally over time. And it's one of those things I look back on, I'm like, wow, how cool is this? That I would just talk authentically from that mental part of my life. And it started so dark and defacing, and it
Mhm.
started bashful. And through time, it became this friend. It became this like jovial voice in the podcast, because through sharing my experiences, I was healing. And all
Mhm.
of a sudden, just naturally, this relationship that I was personifying through audio was becoming nicer and nicer and more fun. And now it just kind of feels like I didn't even need to give that person a voice anymore, because they were listened to internally. That yin and yang that exists within me was being acknowledged. And now I can just kind of do my podcast as it were, and I feel complete in a sense. And I'm very fortunate that, of course, I don't like myself every day. There's some days where I'm like, you know God, there's some stuff that I'm like, I could take that back, kind of thing. But like
Yeah.
at the same time, it's like, yeah, I feel good.
And I love that you were able to mention that, because so many people are out there right now are hating themselves and are down on
Yeah.
themselves, and are even like they're thinking of taking their own life, and they're doing
Yep.
self-harm in that. And I always like to tell them, because I was in that situation and now I'm not. I'm like
So
you.
was I. Yeah.
I'm loving life, and for the most days I'm loving myself in that. And of
Yep.
course I have my down moments in that, but they're nothing like they used to be. And I
Mm-hmm.
never thought that it would get better. I always thought like
Oh
this is the
yeah.
way it was going to be. And so now I look back and I think like if I would have succeeded at taking my own life, I would have
Mm-hmm.
missed out on so much good shit. And so
Oh yeah,
what
hell
would
yeah.
you, yeah, right? And so what would you tell those people that are sitting at home right now going, you know
Mm-hmm.
what? I'm hating life right now.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like a great place to start. I mean, that was my thing.
Yeah.
Was I was suicidal twice in my life, and obviously, like, would love a little disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, because it's a heavy conversation, could be triggering. But I was suicidal twice in my life, once in high school and once in university. And the time in high school, the reason that I didn't, follow through with kind of my ideation was the fact that I didn't believe that I even deserved the relief of death.
Mm.
I hated myself to such an extreme, to such a significance, that I was like, I am a terrible, terrible person, and I deserve to suffer. And every day I woke up and I suffered and I suffered and I suffered and I suffered, until my second kind of crisis moment in university, when there was this light bulb that kind of clicked. And I think that this might be, pertinent to the question. There was this light bulb that clicked, that I realized as I was on the floor of my kitchen, and I realized I was like, this is it. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And this little like thing just snapped, and it said, wow, you are capable of experiencing the worst of life. You are capable of experiencing the most extreme, terrible emotions. And if you're capable of experiencing the extreme lows, then naturally in a world that is balanced, that has good and bad, you are capable of experiencing extreme things, which,
Mm,
I would consider that to be like love and happiness
yeah.
and unconditional. And I was like, oh my God, maybe if I'm able to experience these terrible lows, I'm able to experience the extreme highs as well. And I just need to find them, and they're out there. And for some reason, that little glimmer of just like, maybe life isn't exactly what I think it is. Maybe I'm just naive. Maybe I'm,
Mm,
in need of healing and I am sick. And there's actually a universe out there that is not filled with storm clouds and dark. And maybe it's just out of reach right now. Maybe there's something about right now that like can be a bit of a turning point. And that's when I started using rock bottom, which is the most solid of all foundations, to build my life back. And it became a place that I was familiar with, and I recognized how to deal with it. And it became like, I was like, wow, I can handle this stuff. And that was kind of like the whole idea of Big Brother and saying you can do challenging things,
mm.
to pick yourself up off the floor and put your knuckles in the dirt and say, you know what, I'm going to give it one more try. And every day saying, I'm going to take one baby step in the right direction. That's doing a tough thing. And if you can prove that to yourself, I get the world, Bob's your uncle. The world is nothing after you conquer yourself. And so, and not even, I wouldn't say conquer yourself, because after you learn to build with yourself, that's really what it is. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
controlling. It's about letting it live. And so, yeah, I think that was the point where I was just like, shit, I can do tough stuff because I can get up. And
Yeah.
I kept getting up time and time again. And every time you get up, that is a practice in self-love. Get up off the floor, and I did it again. All right, time to take another crack at the bat. It's love. It is, and you deserve it. You deserve all of it.
I love it. It's like you believed in yourself and you allowed yourself, you were giving yourself the permission to fail, and
Yeah.
because you knew you would just get back up. And
Yeah.
so many people don't give themselves the permission to fail. They think that they
Yeah.
fail, that's it.
Oh,
And
hey.
that is like not the way to look at shit, right?
Oh,
Like
I mean, hey, hell, I can promise you, I wouldn't have been nearly as good of TV as if I had have taken it safe in life, and really not tried to just kind of be like, if I fail, who gives a shit.
yeah.
So yeah, it definitely it leads to some more fun experiences for sure.
Yeah, and I always like to tell people, like, where would you be if you were that like infant that was trying to walk and you just
Mm,
fell and you gave up, right? You
yeah.
would
Yeah.
still be laying there on the floor, like
100%.
crawling around, getting to places, right? Like
Hmm.
go back to being who that was and just get up
Mm,
and keep on going. And don't
I
be
like that.
afraid to fail because they weren't afraid. We weren't afraid to fail when we were babies. Like,
We are naturally not, we're not born with this feeling of failure. It is a
right.
social construct. It is
Yes.
not something. It is this idea of perfection that does not exist. It is, no, it is so true. Like, we tried everything as kids, and where did it lead you to? It led you to a fully developed human being.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going, keep
Yeah.
trying, keep
Yeah.
failing. And when the failures happen, my goodness, don't beat yourself up about it. That is life. Like, this whole like world is imperfect, and it's you are just part of it. You're just a little cog in a machine. And some people find that really scary, but I think that's very liberating, is that
Mm-hmm.
like you are just a small little speck of space dust that is all culminated in some form of consciousness. And nobody will remember you one day. And I think that there is a profound beauty in the fact that I will not be remembered, and I love that. I love
Mm-hmm.
it. It's great. Maybe somebody will remember me 20, 100, 1,000 year, a million years from now, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
But someday nobody will remember me. Nobody will remember the flaws. Nobody will remember the slips along the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I will have just had to experience this thing, this gift, and however I could have. And there you go. And then it's somebody else's problem.
Yeah, and why not experience it to the best in the way that you possibly can? Because
Cheers to
who
that.
wants to live it in misery? And that
Yeah.
was one of the things that kind of helped me when it came to like getting out of my depression, that and I realized like I
Mm-hmm.
have a lot more control over my own depression than I ever realized.
Mm,
And that was like, do I like I go through these bouts of depression, but I always end
mm,
up feeling better. And then I always end up taking and kind of like taking off where I left off before the
mm-hmm.
depression hit. And I realized like I keep doing this to myself, and like, why not just take
Mm,
out the middle depression part and put
yeah.
that aside? And so
Yeah.
for the last 3 years, haven't been gone through any major depression episodes,
Mm-hmm.
because if it does creep up, I allow for the feelings, I figure out what's going on, and then I move past it and just
Yeah.
keep on going. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of people don't realize that they do have a lot more control over how they feel when it comes to their anxiety and
Yeah.
their depression and that. And they don't
Yeah.
need to let let it control who they are.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And I think that there's definitely like, in certain circumstances, like brain chemistry plays a significant role. And so for some people, it's like for me, for myself, I went and I started taking medication back. I think it was like the first year of the pandemic, so 2020. And that was
Mm-hmm.
one of those things where it was so funny. As soon as my brain chemistry balanced out, I was like, oh, I can work now. Oh, I can like go in
Mm-hmm.
here and do the work. And so in some cases, it's like, yeah, you do need a little bit of
Yeah.
assistance. There's nothing wrong in that. You need a little bit of balancing out so that you can go in and do the work. It's not like I think that's one of those things, and even something I struggled with and continue to struggle with is it's not that you're relying on this thing. Is it's simply a tool for you to go in and actually use the power that you have. It's just like, it's evening the playing field a little bit. And then in that case, I can kick anxiety's ass anytime I want to, as
Mhm.
long as I have an even playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess I gonna ask you this. Would you ever
Mm.
do Big Brother again?
It's such a loaded question. I think that not right now. If they called and said, Big Brother Canada 11 is coming up and they said, hey, we want you back on the show, I'd say, not right now. A couple years from now, maybe I consider it. But like, there's a part of me that's like, maybe that's part of my past. Maybe that's one of those things where, wow, what an amazing experience. And now I just get, it gave me some clarity in my life. And it's like, okay, I can kind of step forward and do a new chapter. But there's definitely like, it was a fun game, and it was. And I think that like, it's extremely it's brutal. It is, but it's almost like getting a tattoo. It's like you sit there and you're like, God, this is the worst. And then you leave and you're like, okay, it's kind of cool. And so like
Yeah.
it's a tricky one. I wouldn't do it. I don't know. It might be in my past. It's still something that I'm like actively working through. It would take some time for sure. I would need to become a different version of myself to want to go and put myself through that again. Some people, yeah, and that's the thing, because it's like I think the idea of saying put yourself through it again, it is a ringer, and but like I do also remember how I was 3, 4, 5 months post show, and being like, ooh, that wasn't fun, like and I try
Mhm.
to live my life as fun, and every day should be as special as possible, and I do remember the rut and the absolute like being embarrassed to go outside, and every time people would like see me, and oh, I still, you'd go outside, and I went to a soccer game one time, and I just had somebody who was like sitting beside me, basically like, telling me about all the flaws that I made in the game. And I was just like, I know, yes, sure, blah, 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 kind of thing. And I'm like, do I really want to do that again? Or do I want someday for like in 2 years from now for somebody to be like, hey, I listened to your podcast, or I saw your lecture at this university, or I read this article that you wrote, and talk about something that's mine versus something that's somebody else's. And so there's definitely there's a pull in a few different directions. Right now, no, I wouldn't do it again. But do I think that there's a really lovely aspect to the game that I think I'd benefit from again? Sure, of course. It's a very it's a tricky one.
Yeah. Do you keep in contact with anybody from the Big Brother family, I guess you would call them?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
do. I there's definitely. I mean, Steph was just down at my place last week. I was
Mm-hmm.
showing her on the East Coast. She'd never been down to the East Coast, so literally Steph, the person who left on my HOH, wonderful, lovely human being, and we become really close because we share so many similarities outside of the Big Brother house, and that's what these relationships you have to reevaluate them as is like, do you have stuff outside of the house? Steph is somebody I'm tremendously close with. Jess, they're wonderful. I keep in close contact with them. They're very mindful, and they're somebody who we have so many similarities that from the outside looking in, you'd be like, could not pick two different individuals, but there's so much that we share in terms of like our approaches to life and our mindsets. Marty, who I believe you've had
Yeah.
on the pod before, Marty, I still keep in touch with Marty once in a while. We just touch base. Gino and Jace, I reach out to them once in a while just to kind of check in on how they're doing. Josh, I'm hoping to work on a project with Josh here soon. So I do keep in contact with quite a T.
Yeah.
T is just a ray of sunshine. She's amazing. There's a lot of people who I very much cherish from my time. Yeah, and then other people who have been on other seasons,
Mhm.
who have been very kind to me. And yeah, there's always that's the thing in a community where you bring together some very unique individuals. There's some unique dynamics, but you
Yeah.
also get the opportunity to really develop some very cool friendships for sure.
I love that. And so I was gonna ask, like, does the anxiety part ever get in the way with building friendships and relationships with
Mm.
people for you?
Just in people in general kind of thing
Yeah.
outside of the Big Brother house?
Yeah, like well, especially in the Big Brother house, to me that just kind of intensifies everything.
Certainly, it does. I would say that yes, it does. Let's start. Let's set that foundation there. It certainly does. I'd say for myself, yeah, it's definitely in the my like relationship life. I find is something that definitely anxiety and OCD plays a role in because it's so intimate, it's so vulnerable, and that in that state, although I'm comfortable with it, in certain elements of my life, it's a different kind of vulnerability. It's not just vulnerability is not this blanket thing where it's like, oh, I'm vulnerable in front of the camera and on a mic. I'm going to be vulnerable with a significant other who I'm building a life with.
Right.
So that's where I definitely find that my anxiety can play a role and my OCD can play a role is in those situations. Although I've gotten tremendously better in my own perception over the past 3-4 years kind of thing as I've developed the relationship with myself, become more confident as a person. So certainly in romantic relationships for sure. Yes, with friendships, I definitely I what's so funny is it's like it's not that it necessarily it has little influence, but it's part of who I am. And so I think that that's one of those things that like the people who are in my life who I cherish and I hold very closely are people who acknowledge that it's part of my life. It's not it's one of those things
Mhm.
where like anxiety does not direct me in one way or another. It does not say you cannot talk to this person, you can talk to this person. It's when people are willing to like look at me and say, regardless of the thing that makes you sometimes a little bit like recede or pull back into yourself, I care about you, I love you, and I want and I see you as a whole entire human being. I'd say it's almost becoming a bit of a litmus test for people in my life is
Mhm.
when they and also I would definitely say it's also people who set clear boundaries and are like, listen, if you're not communicating with me, who set that expectation where it's like if you're not communicating with me how you need to approach this situation or how you need to be cared for right now, then I can't do much, and that's a really kind of tough friendship to navigate. So it's like those expectations I actually find are very healthy for me because it's like
Mhm.
sometimes you need people to hold you accountable and say like, listen, I care about you deeply and I acknowledge that this is it, but this is also your thing. This is not our thing that we deal with. This is your thing.
Mhm.
And that's a very healthy boundary that I respect tremendously in people is when they do set that boundary, they say, yep, you have to deal with this stuff, but I need you to talk to me about how I can deal with it with you. Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Amazing. So yeah, it definitely it plays a role, but it's not the conductor.
I love that. And like, I think boundaries is what helps get us through the anxiety in our lives, right? As long as
100%.
we've got boundaries and we have our own back with them and
Yeah.
not, say what the boundary is and then hide behind a corner when, the
Yes.
thing comes up, which
Got to
many of
say it
us
with your
do.
chest. Oh, absolutely. 100%. Yeah, you got to say it loud and proud.
Yeah. What are some tips you have for those who do that where they kind of hide around the corner? They set the boundary, but then the shit comes up and instead of having their own back, they just like let it go and then they have the regret and all that jazz that comes along with
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, well, I mean, hey, people pleasers of the world unite. This is something that it's an ongoing thing for me. It's something that I'm learning. As I said, 24 years old, got a lot of learning to do. So setting boundaries is definitely it's difficult because it is so, especially when you're and people who work in our field in terms of podcasting, holding space for people, it is really tough to like not just inherently become that trauma dump or the person who just kind of like you can call it 2 in the morning and just kind of
Mhm.
say, hey, here's every tough emotion I'm feeling right now, deal with it. So it is very difficult, and that is something that I've like boundaries is actually, I would say, something that's kind of defining this like little this kind of period of my life right now is because of the fact that like something I'm working on.
Mhm.
I'm not great at setting boundaries. I'll openly say that I'm not the best at kind of telling people like, hey, here's exactly where I am, because I'm just kind of like, well, I do enough self-work that I can handle a little bit more. But it's like I actively am trying to become a little bit more like I can handle it, or I can channel that energy into things that are going to further where I'm going, and that's something that's really important to me, and that's showing myself self love. So I think that like in terms of kind of what I've learned recently is just the fact that like setting boundaries is a form. It's an act of self care and self love, and by doing it, you are honoring yourself, and every chance that you have to honor yourself, you should take it. And so I think that that's one of
Mhm.
those things where even though it is going to be like gut wrenching. And you're going to have to look at somebody who you care about it or you know is in a tough situation and you go, I can't be exactly what you want me to be because I need to be here for me. Huge, huge.
Mhm.
A month from now, after you set that boundary, you're going to feel so much better because you're like, wow, I have so much energy. There's not, or I feel so much closer with this person because we act within the boundaries that we've both set with one another. I think that you just have to be confident in the fact that, like, if somebody doesn't respect your boundary, and that's always a fear is like, oh, well, I want to keep this person in my life, but what if I drive them away with a boundary? Then drive them away with a boundary because that person is going to step, on you per se as you continue to build your relationship, and you don't deserve that. So I think it's just acknowledging the fact that it is self-care, it is self-love. Tell you, repeat that on your way to like wherever you're going to go, have set the boundary on a phone call or coffee chat or whatever. you know Self-care, it's self-love, it's self-care, it's self-love, and I deserve that stuff. So
And I think it's too like looking at it like if the person, if you set a boundary and that person doesn't want to like follow through in that, then you
yeah,
have it's your choice to whether or not you want to continue that relationship or not.
yeah,
And do you want to continue a relationship with somebody who doesn't want to follow? And depending on what the boundary is, right? Like
yeah,
if it's because you're 5 minutes late for a meeting or something compared to something else, like totally,
right,
but it's like you get to decide. And
yeah,
what really got me to really, I'm a people pleaser, but what has
oh,
helped me immensely change that, I'm not perfect, but change it
no,
to a great deal, was my coach told me that people pleasers are really liars. And
mm,
I was like, huh, I don't like to be a liar.
mm.
Right. And
That's a
so,
really good one. I like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one thing I'm like, lying is just one thing I don't like. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't want to be known as a liar. Even if nobody
Mm-hmm.
else thinks I am, I
Sure.
will now think I am because now
Yeah.
that my coach got that in my head. And so now
Right.
that's the thought that I go with. And so when
Mm-hmm.
I have somebody who's like, hey, you want to do this? And I really don't want to, but I
Mm-hmm.
feel and hear myself saying yes, I just bring up the fact like, do I want to be a liar right now?
Mm. Mm. I'm going to use that because that's really good. I like that
Yeah.
a lot. That's
Yeah.
actually that very much kind of like, and geez, to further that into like relationships and stuff. It's like, are you going to build a relationship that's built on lies? No.
Yeah.
Why would you do that? Oh, okay. Like, if you're not, if you have to lie to be in a relationship with somebody, probably not the relationship for you. Very good. Like
Exactly.
that a lot. Thank you,
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, I don't want to take up much any more of your time, but
Oh, this has been
before
lovely.
we sign off, where
Sure.
can all the viewers find you? I'll definitely put all your information in the show notes, but
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, if they want to check out the podcast, I would love that. Check it out. It's Life's a Wreck on your favorite podcasting platform, Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever. Would love if you'd rate and review it. If you do listen to it, if you don't like it, let me know. If you do like it, let me know. And then in terms of social media, I'm not very active on Twitter, so I wouldn't necessarily plug that one. But like Instagram is probably the ones that I'm active on the most. So my personal Instagram is at Moorzy, MOORZYYY, and then my podcast Instagram is at Life's a Wreck Podcast. Yeah, would love to, if you hear this and want to touch base, would love to connect and further the conversation for sure. And Jennifer, thank you. This has honestly just been what a lovely way to spend a Sunday. Thank you. And thank you for such insightful questions. This has really been a treat.
oh, thank you. Thank you for coming on. And when you said yes, it made my day. So I was really looking forward to it. And I know I had canceled last week because I
Oh,
just
it's okay.
woke up deathly ill. It was ridiculous.
Hey,
I
no
literally went
worries. No
out the
worries.
night before and I didn't drink anything. I had one birthday shot for somebody. I didn't drink anything. And I woke up feeling so hungover. I
Oh,
literally felt like I had alcohol poisoning.
really?
I couldn't keep nothing down. It was, I
Jeez,
don't
it doesn't
understand
sound.
it.
Yeah, no, it
And
doesn't sound like how I'd
every
want to do a podcast.
yeah, and everyone's like, "You didn't even drink." I'm like, "I know."
Oh,
Like,
nasty bugs. That's
yeah,
ever since COVID. I feel like these bugs are getting a little bit
yeah,
stronger.
yeah. So, yes, thank you so much for coming in and,
Thank you.
talking with me. And I'll definitely have your information in the show notes so that if anybody, wants to listen to your podcast or,
Thank you.
feel like they can resonate with you and talk with you, I'm sure you'd be more than happy to chat with anybody
Absolutely.
that's, especially if they're struggling. So, again,
100%.
thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend as well. And for
Thank
all
you
of
as well.
you amazing people, we thank you for tuning in and spending your Sunday or whatever day you're listening to this with us. We absolutely appreciate every single one of you. And remember, no matter what, you are somebody You matter. And that's it. There's no questions about it. Don't even have to debate it. You know where to find me. You're going to know where to find Kyle. If you have any questions on that, that's the deal drill. Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much. Have a good one. And that is all, folks. Thank you.